So the subject of today's webinar is 7 ways to scale your business. And this is the agenda. I'm going to do an introduction, which is going to comprise of a background about me briefly, and then we're going to get into the core of today's webinar, which is looking at what are the elements that it takes to scale a business. Of course, every single item on here, including the word scaling, needs to be defined. And I'm going to use definitions that I'm comfortable with. I by no means claim that they are the definitions. They're just the ones that I'm going to use for today. And of course, they're open. Everything is open to debate. I started up growing up in a family business. Both parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents are all involved in different businesses. So I soaked that up very quickly. I absolutely hated school. I was a rebel and I wanted to be a pop star with Titus Oates. And that's me in the middle with the hair there when in my late teens, early 20s. And I got chatting to a guy in the sound rehearsal studio where we were practicing, and formed a business with him. And that became the first business called Muscle Music, which rented PA systems to touring groups and the bands that were rehearsing in the rehearsal studio. I gave up the drumming. I mean, it was fun, but not as a proper career. And the business grew and scaled up quickly. We worked with a lot of different bands, some really famous people that you can see there, Frank Sinatra, Motorhead, a real variety of bands that were really incredible to work with. The biggest client that we had was the Jam, and I became the live sound engineer for the Jam for several years in the late 70s, and I went all around the world with them. They made very successful. They made a lot of money, as you probably know. Paul Weller wrote all those songs, for those of you old enough to remember. And they made so much money that their accountant said, you know, you really ought to spend some of it on something useful. And they made an offer to buy the entire company, lock, stock and barrel. So at the age of 25, 26, I made my first company sale, which was £60,000 for a company that I'd put £2,500 into. And then what did I do with that money? I invested it in manufacturing in the company's early stage startup called Turbo Sound. And you can see there the large scale PA systems that we made in our factory in Sussex. And we scaled up over 10 years, merged with another couple of companies. I moved to New York to get the company going there, and we became very successful in America. Our clients were bands like Pink Floyd, Michael Jackson, Paul McCartney. We also made electronic equipment that we sold to places like Abbey Road, BBC, and so on. So it was a big success. I also opened up a joint venture in Japan, and thanks to all the exports, Turbo Sound won the Queen's Award for export, the first in our area to do that. By the end of the 80s, we had about 100 people in 3 factories and a head office in Islington. So the company was at roughly 5 million turnover, making about £500,000 profit and growing quickly. Behind the scenes, there were a lot of tensions, I'm putting it diplomatically, and partly as a result of that, we sold the group in a trade sale. And then I took a year out, and I became a business angel and joined 3i on their MBI network, management buy-in network, looked at a lot of different businesses, and I ended up investing in an early stage hospitality customer service business. And that grew quickly. We were in the right place at the right time. We had some really great clients like Hilton, Cafe Rouge, etc. You can see there. And in 1998, that business was sold in a trade sale to Taylor Nelson Softwares. Having done all that, I really miss my baby, turbo sound. I love the dBs and kilohertz and the rock and roll. And I got backing from 3i and the Bank of Scotland and did a buy-in management buyout, or a bimbo. And that's what my wife, that photo is not my wife, but it's what her reaction was like when I came home one day and said, darling, I've done a bimbo. And then I quickly had to explain what I meant. However, big learning, it was a heart over head decision, and it ended up being a turnaround over 4 years. The business was making $1 million EBITDA when I took it over, and it went down and down and down over 2 or 3 years. But I did do a turnaround and managed to sell it again. And then the last 15 years, I've been a one-man band providing business coaching and advice, focusing on owner-managed businesses, and all my clients come through recommendation. And what I want to do is get out there more and reach more people, hence doing these sorts of webinars. So that's very quick background about me. Okay, on to the main subject for today: scalability, scaling, growing a business quickly. Well, there are lots of definitions, and the definition I'd like to use is by Les McCown, who wrote a book called Do Scale. And that's a book I recommend. You can find it on the internet, Do Scale by Les McCown. His definition, and it's all about ability and capability. And that's what I'm focusing on today in the webinar. It's the scalability is the ability over time to sustainably grow your organization to whatever size your industry or sector will allow, in whichever market segments you choose to engage. And it's that sustainable growth that I'm focusing on. And in the businesses I've owned, or my clients' businesses that have done it properly, they've done it in a way that is sustainable, where they've kept the culture of the business while they've been growing it very rapidly. Okay, so again, this theme of understanding what's needed. So first of all, number one, it's crucial to understand the skills and capabilities essential for scaling. What do I mean by skills and capabilities? The definitions of that. So that is the ability to do something. Now, it doesn't mean that if your people are limited by the abilities they've got and the business needs certain capabilities to grow, then the key point is to recognize that those abilities are going to be needed and to get them in, so that it's not necessarily a question of only the existing people in the business having to learn new things. It's also about bringing new people in where necessary. It's also changing the way the business looks at people. It becomes more role than people focused. And that means going from, well, Laura and Jim and Jane and John are the people we have in the business. We're going to get the best out of them, and that's all we're going to do. We're also going to look at what kind of resources we need, whether that's funding, factory, bigger capacity, different types of people in order to get to the next stage. The analogy I use, it's a bit like climbing a mountain, and a startup early stage business might be able to get to the equivalent of a few thousand feet up the mountain, and then it gets to a base camp, and then it's looking to get to the next part of the mountain. It may need very different resources in terms of people, funding, actual physical things, rope, ice picks, whatever it happens to be, to get to that next stage. And that means actually planning resources in a more strategic way. And then there's this question of, well, how do you measure skills and capabilities. And I think this is not just a soft skill. This is also quite a hard part of needing to measure skills and capabilities. There's a lot of different systems out there. And then again, depending on what the business is trying to achieve and the particular sector it's in and the particular business model and what is its vision, then there can be an appropriate way of measuring those skills and capabilities necessary for the business to scale. Okay, this is a biggie. Creating cultural change in the business to promote scalability. Definitions. I'm going to do definitions on every slide. What do I mean by cultural change? What do I mean by culture? I'd simply call it behavior. They're the behaviors that are taking place in the business today. They're also the behaviors that the owner or owners want to see in their staff, in their team, when they're not there. How are people showing up? How are they behaving? How are they behaving towards clients, suppliers, other team members? Has that been articulated in terms of the behaviors, which is a fancy, the fancy word for that is values for behaviors. There are lots of companies that have got amazing definitions of values. Enron had everything you'd want, but the actual behavior of Enron was make as much money as possible by any way, and we don't care how we act. So this is really bottling what the values and the behaviors that we want to see in the business, and then beginning to measure it so that there's what I call a return on behavior. And that is something that is possible to instill in an organization and then see what kind of return there is. And as the business grows, what I talk about sustainable growth, it is not about growth at any cost. In my view, it's about finding a balance between that growth and that scaling in terms of measured by turnover or profit, and still keeping the culture that is necessary to make the business sustainable, which is why it's so important to look at why the business exists, the purpose of the business, not just to make money. Then we're going to look at the business structures and processes to support growth. What do I mean by that? What definitions? Things like organization charts, workflows, position descriptions, all the things that start to build real structure into the business and processes that may well not have been needed in the early stage of the business, when it needs to go from early stage to later, and carrying on growing the business to double each year, or at least grow by 20-30% a year. So there's a balance here of keeping the entrepreneurial spirit with the structure, that it doesn't become corporate. On the other hand, it becomes gradually more structured. And depending on what the type of business it is, I can't emphasize that enough, what the business model is and the sector that it's in, there is no fixed one way of doing it. I would not for a moment say that Teal or Agile is better than another type of structure. There are lots of different flavors of structures, and it's important to understand what they are and what's right for that particular business. Another very important part of scaling is, of course, funding and having enough cash to do it. Depending on the business model, is it cash generative as it grows, or is it actually cash negative? Very important to understand that and to fund accordingly. I've seen a number of clients who have funded only through borrowing and not equity because they refused to dilute any of their shares, and they've suffered as a result of it, because it's like trying to drive a car with no fuel in it. So be very realistic about the type of funding that's needed. And then the last point on this slide is to do with team-based decisions. Often the beginnings of a company are rather dictatorial. Whether it's one entrepreneur or a couple of partners, it's going by instinct, and they're usually right. They've got a company up to a certain size. However, as it matures, I think team-based decisions become more and more important, that there's more a discussion that takes place, less dictatorial. Some owners can't make that change. And I'm going to come on to that now in the next slide. So making the shift from founder to leader, this is very hard to do, and not everyone can do it. There's a very nice quote, which I'd like to try to go to, trying to do some multimedia stuff here. Let's just try and see if this will work. I'm going to stop sharing this screen and go to a different screen for a moment. Which I think is worth doing. Let's just see if this works. Okay, check this out. This is the Netflix owner talking about this. Can you all see a face staring at you?
Yep.
Okay, let's see if the audio works. If not, you can read what he says.
My CEO's secret is recognizing that the very skills that may have made you successful in getting the company started may not be the right skills to bring the company to the next level. By having some of the skill sets for starting companies up, I have this predisposition to action. I don't think things. I don't overthink things. You said, let's quickly figure out whether our assumption is correct. Reed was concerned. He was concerned about my judgment. He was seeing my inability to make the hard decision, my inability to have the strategic sense of where we were going. When someone's telling you your failings, it's very hard not to get defensive. I had to reflect and say, am I the right person to lead this company? Do I have the skills that will be needed? I figured out early what I'm good at and what I enjoy doing in its early stage. But the very, very skills that help you get down are a different set of skills than what are required to bring it forward as it gets larger and the scale changes. Getting out of the way is a critical component of doing the right thing.
Okay, so I thought that was brilliantly put. I couldn't have put it better myself. And going back to my PowerPoint, here we go. Where were we? There we go. So this making the shift from founder to leader, I'm not saying for a moment that every single founder has to get out of the way. However, I do think it's very important to be honest with oneself and to have others that are outside the business looking in and giving a reality check of what the capabilities are of the owner or owners, the founder or founders who've got the business up to a certain stage. And changing to leader may not be possible. Some can, but not everybody can. So That's why it says what got you here won't get you there. And that's a very good book by Marshall Goldsmith. That's the actual title of the book, which I recommend. And again, it's this sense that what got us the business to a certain stage won't necessarily get it to the next stage. And this change from founder to leader, or at least having leaders in the business, if they don't exist there today, bringing people in to get the business up to the next stage, is a really key one. It's not to be underestimated, and it may not be possible. But what if the business has got this amazing potential and really there aren't the capabilities there? The founder is not able to take it further. So what do? Some founders are not able to step outside themselves, and the business stays at a certain level, a certain size, which, by the way, can be 1 million, 10 million, 50 million. This can be any size. I'm not saying it's only startup size, but the business only ever stays at the size that the founder or founder's capability will allow. That's the key point. And if the business got a potential to go further, then think about having new people brought in. Then there's this question of focus on the things your business does well. So by the definition of focus is doing less, not doing more, being laser sharp with what the business does, who it serves. Startups and early stage businesses often say yes to anything to get off the ground. The rate of failure is very high. Here in the UK, about 2/3, 3/4 of businesses don't make it past the first few years. So the business has survived that long, past, if you like, babyhood and early childhood. Then what it needs to grow and to scale is counterintuitive. It's actually laser-like focus on what it does well and who it serves. So often it narrows what it's doing and who it serves in order to grow. And it's terribly important to get customer feedback and get outside in view of what it is that the company is doing well. And that can be all about positioning, and therefore being really clear about the tip of the arrow of what the company is known for, the brand is known for, and with whom. And that can be key. Counterintuitive, this point, but that's what works in my view. Mapping out a clear business succession plan. What do I mean by succession? It's the idea that over a period of years, there is a clear route for people who are ambitious, who join a company already in it, to gradually take more responsibility and even have the chance one day of becoming MD or CEO of the company, so that there is a letting go that is shown in writing. I'll say that again, shown in writing. That's what I mean by a clear business succession plan, and that is shared in the company, because it then becomes very motivational. And it's never too early to start, even if it's just discussing it and saying, I'm thinking about who my successors are, so that there isn't this sense of, just because I started it, I'm going to be there for the whole of the company's life, and there's no way for anybody to step up into a CEO or leadership role. And then it becomes very rewarding, and also there can be rewards for the people who do that. And then finally, for this section, then I'm going to open it up to a discussion, is getting into the habit of planning forward for growth. So this whole transition of a business from instinct and gut feeling in the early days to much more strategy, writing, planning. So the founder, if they are able to change to a more leadership role, they're beginning to look at least a year or 2 or 3 ahead. They are less worried about the day-to-day. They're gradually handing over, giving themselves space to look forward So they're always a year or two ahead of where the business is today. They're planning for it. They're away writing, researching, thinking ahead, and then communicating that to the team of where the business is going to be in the future. So in my view, those are the 7 key elements of scaling. And so what I want to do now is open up, stop sharing for a minute and have a discussion from those slides. And of course, I can refer back to them if anybody would like to, has a question on a particular slide. So we've got a small enough group, I think, that all the mics can be open, and I'll just go round the room, so to speak, and who'd like to ask a question or bring a point up?
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to ask a question.
Go for
Richard
it.
Harborne. My question is, how do I identify where I am? Am I, am I just a startup CEO, or is it am I the person that could scale a business over time?
You know that by the type of capabilities, the skills that you have, also what you feel comfortable with structure, with planning, with that side of it, whether that energizes you, just as the chap said at Netflix, recognize that that wasn't really his skill set, and he was more comfortable with startup level and getting a business to a certain size. So my question back to you, Richard, would be, looking back over your career, what have you enjoyed most? What stage have you got businesses up to? And what can you imagine doing going forward?
Thank you. Okay, yes, I think that clarifies it for me at the moment. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yes, I've got a client at the moment, and this is actually all very interesting to me, what you said, so thank you very much. Because I have a client at the moment who has a tech startup, and in my humble opinion, working with him, he needs to do the Netflix thing and hand over. I think he's done a great job of getting it to where it is, but I can't see him or the company developing without major shifts in terms of equity, funding, getting experts on to totally take this to the next level. So it's very interesting hearing. I mean, that's basically what I said to him last night on the telephone, as politely as possible. And you basically just totally given me, I could literally repeat all of this to him, and I think he would understand even better.
Okay. What sort of vision does the client have for his company?
Well, no, I don't mind telling you. It's an M-learning app. Basically, there are others, but he's got a very nice little sort of boutique business where he's got sort of software engineers in Estonia, I think. He's got people that help him with his marketing in India, and he's basically a solo individual that's been calling on my expertise to help with various things. And I mean, I just can't see it growing without like some full-time roles, basically what you've said here, but what you're talking about applies to much bigger companies. He's very much at the smaller end, but I just think now is, if ever there was a time for him to join some incubation sort of company that says, yes, we'll take 30-40% of your equity, but we'll do everything, now might be it,
And is
and
that
allow him to make more. Go on.
Sorry, Tim. Is that what he actually wants for his company? He wants it to grow, or is he comfortable with the size it's at now?
No. He's desperate for it to grow. He's very keen that it grows. He needs a full-on marketing team. He needs a team of engineers that aren't part-time, but that are dedicated, that are constantly iterating his product. These are his blocks of success as far as I can see, and I've recently met a company that might be able to help him do that, so I'm trying to sort that out for him.
Yeah, good. Sounds very good. Well, as I said at the beginning, you'll have a copy of this, so by all means use it however you like. If it helps your client, then all the better.
Yeah, it's really good. And tangentially, also fascinated about your. So I have a music past myself, so I know all about turbo sound, though not as much as you do, I'm sure. They definitely were the speakers of choice in a number of events that I've performed at, and how fascinating. So really nice to meet you.
Oh, good. Thank you for that. It's still very dear to my heart, and it's very satisfying to see the company carrying on, going from strength to strength. And that, by the way, it speaks to my point earlier of the founder sometimes getting out of the way.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Who else would like to contribute or ask a question? Simon or George? You haven't spoken. Hello, George. As I guess
Hi, Alan.
joined halfway through.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm in Colombia at the moment, and I didn't realise the clocks had changed a few days ago. So it's a nice early start this morning. No, thank you very much. That was really interesting. I don't have any questions at the moment. If I do, I'll let you know. But thank you.
Pleasure. Well, enjoy Colombia.
Thank you.
Simon, would you like anything you'd like to ask or say?
No, interesting. Alan, I wish I had this a couple of years ago when I was with part of a larger business who were trying to scale, but to be honest with you, failed miserably, and it's basically due to a lot of the main one was values and not having the right culture. So rather than me wanting to fire half the team, I resigned. So, and decided, so I've gone back to being a startup. Yeah.
Well, that speaks very much to one of the key points that I made about culture and being really conscious about it. And it's often overlooked in a rush for money, and it just doesn't work in my experience.
No, because I was brought in to scale a company from turning over from 600 grand to 20 million within 5 years.
Gosh.
And to be honest with you, it was ridiculous. I don't have that skill set. I was recognizing my own skill set is very different. I'm more of a vision person, an ideas person, not a implementer or potentially like a sales person. So it was sort of a clash in a way. It was never going to work, and not with the business owner's ideas, and not with the resources, and not with the culture. So it turned out to be a bit of a disaster. So I left. Yeah,
but all that good learning side of sound.
It was learning about what I didn't want, because I was seduced with the idea of working with someone who had scaled and sold businesses before, and so the idea of going into a business and thinking £20 million and then having a slice of that to exit within 5 years was very appealing. But the reality was it just wasn't set up for that at all. So I'm sort of reevaluating where I am, which is basically I'm starting up and would be happy with a lifestyle business at the moment, and then and scale it from there.
Yeah, I think understanding what we don't want is as important as understanding what we do want.
Yeah, indeed. That helped. But it was about 2 years of my life, which obviously I learned, but yeah, a bit painful. But that's part of business, right?
It is. Excuse the classic thing. It's a journey. It's often said, but it's true. And learning and then moving on to the next thing. Thank you for that. Remini, are you still with us?
I am. I've had a couple of near misses in the car, but I'm still here.
Oh my God.
Yes. But anyway, I'm very interested in everything. I mean, a lot of what you said has made me think about some of my clients, and one of which has a big, decent sized learning platform that he sells, and he sells the platform to big brands, and he thinks everything's wonderful, and his his ideas are amazing, and he's a bit of a maverick, but he doesn't appreciate a lot of what you're saying. He's got backing, financial backing, but actually he's not delivering. And so it's just making me think, how do I get those messages across, and actually make him listen. I mean, what I've been doing for him is interviewing his clients and finding out how unhappy his clients are. They have started to make some of the changes, which is good, off the back of what the clients are saying, but it's trying to, I'm coming across it more and more of these founders who are brilliant at their visions, but actually managing people. And I mean, their turnover of this particular company is appalling. Turnover of teams, and how they, you know, anyone who's been there over 6 months is an old timer. And actually, how do you manage that, and how do you kind of keep good staff, and how do you manage the owners in that sort of circumstance? And that might be another discussion. But
well, there's a really key point which I was trying to get at a little bit with Tim, with the client that he was talking about, and that is whether they want to change, whether they're aware that they need to change. You know, if somebody isn't, I don't think any of us can force that on somebody. It may be that through the work you're doing, by asking their clients, their own customers, and getting an outside-in view, that will in some way jerk them into action, into awareness that not everything is what it should be. But otherwise, if they're not aware of it, it's very hard to initiate change.
I mean, it is. I think they are starting to make some changes. I've been doing some follow-on calls, and actually the clients are beginning to get a bit happier, and just with their honesty, they're now becoming a bit more telling the clients what the limitations of the product are has actually helped. But it's getting that balance, and it's managing the owners who kind of are flighty and excitable. Sometimes they need a bit of a slap, but you can't obviously do that. But yes, it's just interesting to hear how to manage that side of things. But so
I think in my view, once there is an awareness of any obstacle to growth or where they want to be, and if they're not in reality, they've got some fantasy going on that everything is great, and they're going back to Simon's experience of growing a £20 million company, and they think they're going to have that, you know, any moment now. The moment that there's an introduction of a reality check by outside evidence, not you telling them, in other words, it's got to be from a source that they would respect and they will take seriously, and presented in a way that's very objective. Obviously they don't seem to care about people leaving, and they don't necessarily care about their own staff from the staff turnover you're talking about, but I would hope they care about what their clients think of them and what their customers think of them, and therefore that would be something that would get in the way of growth if there's a negative experience.
Yes. Well, I think, as I say, I think they have started this. I did have one client who I did a follow-up call with recently, and they are 70% happier. So with the delivery and the way they're being treated. So there is improvement, but it's kind of still trying to rein in the owner. But I'm hoping that it'll continue to change and improve. So yeah, it's interesting.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other thoughts or comments from anybody? Please do speak up. Meant to be a discussion.
Nothing from me at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah,
Tim, Simon.
So I've got another question.
Yes, hi, Richard.
Yes, hi there. So the financing side of things is certainly my major challenge.
Okay.
Because I've always financed my businesses from my personal assets and from profits from the business.
Yeah.
And I've kind of touched 100,000 turnover in a year. And I've kind of touched about 30 to 35,000 profitability in a year from several businesses. But I've never really got beyond that. And I recognize it really is, it's how to start engaging with the capital markets or with lenders or financing, leasing, and to be honest, it is a bit of a grey area for me, and it is a weakness, I know. How do I solve that?
Well, so that goes, great question, Richard, thanks. It goes right back to the theme of what I've been talking about today, which is about capability. It's absolutely no problem, in my view, that you personally may not have the capability or comfort of being in that space of funding and going out and doing all the stuff that is necessary to do to go out and get equity funding or loan or whatever you need. But you're recognizing that the business, which I'm going to say is a separate entity from Richard Harborne, it's like a child, separate. You may have conceived it, but it's a separate entity from you, needs money. It needs resources to grow. So the question then becomes, where do you get those from? Right? And that question, as soon as you ask that question, that produces a number of possibilities. You could get somebody to come and join you. It could be a partner. It could be an advisor. It could be somebody that, if you can't afford to pay, they could be on some kind of deal where it's creative, that is a percentage of success, percentage of money raised, but somebody who's got a track record of fundraising and the ability to know how to do it, and hopefully has the contacts to do that as well, that you're doing for the business because you recognize the business needs that.
So what sort of job title would they would cover that? Would it be finance director, or what?
It depends. It doesn't necessarily need to be a job title. It depends on who you get and the relationship you'd like to have with them. It could be just an advisor, somebody who comes in, helps you get the funding, and you never see them again. If, on the other hand, you think the business needs financial capability in the long term, then yes, it could be financial controller, FD, that type of function.
Yes, I mean, I just think I need to go and talk to somebody with those skills just to get a grasp of, because I'm starting a new business, so I've been trying to develop it for some time, and it needs cash now, because it's a cash intensive business. It's carpooling for electric vehicles. And there's quite a demand in my area for cars with electric vehicles in a car sharing manner. But the thing is, we're looking at a minimum of 8,000 and probably 12,000 to purchase the cars for second-hand cars. And I'm just thinking, well, how on earth do I go about doing that? Do I lease them? It's very expensive. But do we have bank loans? So, I mean, is it a finance director that really answers those questions, or accountant, or?
It's certainly somebody with financial acumen. You could talk to your accountant, but ensuring that your accountant has experience of fundraising and knowing how and answering those questions, Richard, whether it's equity or loan or a combination of the two, or some other form of funding. And that goes to the business model. It's a good question, but it's a bigger question in terms of what you want to achieve and finding the right people to help you get there.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. Yeah. So I really need to go on that kind of journey to find that.
And I agree, though, that it's definitely under a heading of financial capability, and it speaks to the theme of today, which is really about having the right resources to scale and get that barrier. You talked about getting your previous businesses up to about 100K. That is a typical barrier. It's a typical place, almost like a
watershed.
Yeah, a sort of a wall. I was going to say that a lot of businesses find it difficult to go through.
Yeah.
And then there's another usually at about $1 million. I mean, it varies, but those are certain places where companies go up to a certain level, get stuck, and then they need different skills and different capabilities to go to the next stage. And it sounds like for you, it's finance.
Yeah, that's one of the key areas for me, finance. Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. That's really identified that one. I knew it was a problem, but now I know I must solve it before moving forward.
Yeah. Good. Any other thoughts, George, Simon, Tim, Remini?
I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappear now. I'm now at my destination, but thank you so much for everything.
Thanks for joining, Rem.
Take care. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Remini. No, that's great. Great for me. Thank you, Ellen. Lots of food for thought. I'm very early on. I'm still sort of following the breadcrumbs of ideas at the moment, different ideas. So no, it's very, very useful for when I get to that stage.
Great. Are you on holiday out there?
A bit of both, really, Alan. So a bit of time away from work just to try and refine my ideas slightly before I come back, and then learn some Spanish and see some new places.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining, George, and have a great time in Colombia.
Thanks, and thanks for being on. Much appreciated.
Pleasure. Good. Any other thoughts, questions? I'll wrap up otherwise.
No, I think that's good. Yes, that's good for me for now. Anyway, I'm sure I have more. I'm sure there's more on the journey, but I think just covering that one area for me thoroughly now, I think that's one to focus on, one step at a time.
Okay, good. Richard, Simon, Tim, last orders.
No, a lot to think about. Yeah, resources is one of my issues.
Yeah,
especially when you're just starting up. Resources and funding.
Yes. Yeah, indeed.
It's been very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure, Tim. Good. All right. Well, then I'll wrap up, and you'll keep a check out on your junk mail, because I'll be sending a recording of this in WeTransfer, and it sometimes goes into spam. But thank you all very much for joining. I'll be doing another one of these at the end of November, and my intention is to roll out the 6 or 7 themes and maybe separate them out and go into more depth. I'm still thinking about it, but you'll get an email with what the next webinar will be.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Bye, everybody. Bye.